Okay, so in our last section on family and mating, we're thinking about partner selection. How do we find that special someone? Well, studies show that for many of us as adults, we actually find them often in the workplace. We may find them in school, we might meet them in high school. We find them in spaces that are collective spaces we know are sometimes often meant to be around people like us or people that we like. We might go to bars or meet people at parties. Often we would go on dates, and there's a short video about the history of dating uploaded to this module that I'd like you to watch. Today, it's increasingly common for people to meet each other through various social media and internet technologies. Is this a rationalization of romance in our society? Let's revisit this concept. Rationalization we've heard of before when we talked about bureaucracy. It generally means the increasing centrality of efficiency in and of itself in our society, which is something that comes from these big bureaucracies. George Ritzer gave a little bit more detail to this idea. Efficiency is still central. So the quickest means to a given end, the quickest way to find someone we care about, the quickest way to get our lunch. Ritzer's discussion is actually called McDonaldization. So think about it in terms of a meal. Oftentimes we used to sit down to a meal, use that time to cook, spend time with others and share in it. But now we've rationalized eating in things like McDonald's. It's much more efficient. It's the quickest means to an end. It's called fast food for a reason. We can often get our meal in moments. It's also very calculable. It's presented to us in terms of numbers, and this is a sign of rationalization. Not only do we tend to measure things more and more in terms of numbers, but more is often seen as better. So here we want to think about how fast food restaurants continually try to get us to take more. They tell us that more food is better. Would you like to supersize that? You can get a side with that. Increasingly, calculability is rationalized. And today we even see the calories and the breakdown of how much fat we're taking in, for example. Again, this is a sign of rationalization. We're turning things into measurable numbers. Our meal is not something to be enjoyed, savored. It is simply a question of how many calories we take in versus how many we burn. It's reduced to simple numbers. Rationalization also demands predictability. And if you think about what a burger tastes like at McDonald's in Augusta versus Atlanta versus California, it's pretty predictable. There are actually chemicals they use to make that taste predictable. If you go to China right now, not recommended, but you will probably have this same tasting burger there. Rationalization demands predictability and hates unpredictability because it's not very efficient. It's much more efficient if we turn things into numbers and make them more predictable. And lastly, it's also more efficient to reduce human error, to take humans out of the equation and increase control, particularly through non-human technology. If you go through another person asking for your order, they might get something wrong and record it wrong. But if you just get it on one of those big touch screens, a great place to pick up germs, by the way, then you're reducing that human error. You're taking the humans out of the equation. UPS drivers have all of their turns and routes tracked electronically. And this is meant to increase control over their behavior. To reduce their human judgment, make sure they don't take left turns, which are inefficient because it wastes time, to make their routes calculable and make it more predictable when they would deliver your package. All of this is much more efficient. So what about rationalization and romance? How do we see these four elements in romance today? Well, let's think about dating sites. Already we're seeing efficiency here. If you don't want to have to run into white people when you're trying to date, well, go to Black Singles Meet. If you're a clown and you just want to date someone who's into the whole clown vibe with you, clowndating.com is for you. Already we're increasing our predictability. We know who's going to be on there more, right? It's only other farmers in the country. We're not going to get some city noob in our dating pool. It's much more efficient because we're rooting out all those who are not people we want to be with. Most major sites like eHarmony let you filter out by race as well, for example. We're increasing control over the situation. How? How does this technology help us increase control? If we look into these sites, one of the things they advertise to us is that they have the best algorithm, so calculability, to match us up with people like us. So again, here we have non-human technology increasing control, right? And making things more efficient. They're weeding out people who are bad matches, supposedly, and matching us up with people who are more likely to be a good match and for us to have a long-term relationship with. So again, non-human technology increases control, increasing efficiency. It's supposedly making it more predictable. It's going to be people who are better matches. And we know that it's more predictable because they've calculated the likelihood that we are going to be successful. This is also indicative of one of the problems of rationalization, what Weber called disenchantment. It's kind of taking the magic out of romance. This is why there's still a fair amount of stigma around these. So there's this rationalization of romance, but what about sex? That too. So today we have a number of apps we can download on our phone that operate in much the same way. You create a profile. How do these types of apps like Tinder or Grindr or even Ashley Madison, how do they rationalize sex? This is going to be our main discussion for this second part. How do dating apps, also known as hookup apps, rationalize or McDonaldize sex? How do we see increased efficiency, control, and predictability? How do they change sexual romantic space? Oftentimes they tell us how distant people are. Do these affect how we think of our partners in real life? Does creating profiles change the way we think of people? The last thing we want to think about in terms of love and romance today is the centrality of pornography. Pornography has exploded on the internet. More recently, with sites like Pornhub, we see the decline of what was called the paywall. The paywall meant that you had to pay to view pornography, but sites like Pornhub offer a ton of pornography for free. How does this change the way we think of sex and romance today? Consider that in the US we have very spotty and very bad sex education. Most of it's about how babies are born. People have very little idea of what sex between people is, how it works, what a condom is. Consider as well that some studies have found that 90% of pornographic scenes feature some sort of verbal or physical violence towards women. How does this affect what we know about sex? How does this affect how we have sex? Think about the fact that many of these sites break down sexual acts into particular objects, fetishes, or desires. How does this divide up the body into smaller parts? How does it make sex something rationalized, commodifiable, and peculiar?